So today we are going to answer a question from a gentleman named Steve Jarrett who had submitted this question. And the question just made me giggle a lot when I was reading it, I think because of how he phrased everything. So I'm going to just read it to you guys. I absolutely love the way you help us understand all of this. I have a few quick questions. If there is a major weather event that causes caskets to pop out of the ground, a hurricane or a major weather including some flooding, caskets that are sealed to protect mom, dad, grandma, and grandpa, and who've been dead for 30 plus years can go on trips and start wandering the neighborhood. 1. If you have one floating on your property, should you tie it to a tree or something with a piece of rope to a handle or avoid it at all cost? 2. Should you run away because of the potential poisoning from formaldehyde or formalin-based embalming fluid? 3. In a truly bad event, the rocking and creaking can cause the sealed caskets to break open and Great Aunt Cleo can start floating down the street. Then the same question. Don't touch or try to lasso the immovable and try to lasso them to an immovable object. Then if I did that, for instance, by a rope around the neck or arm, our body part's going to start popping off. 4. Last one, I promise. The casket pops out, the body itself pops out and becomes mobile, floating down the street. How much care is given to Uncle Olin to make sure that those remains are his? Hypothetically speaking, he died in 1957 and not too many folks remember him. Last part. I guess after a bit he's become waterlogged. How toxic are his remains? I can easily see this becoming a hell on earth. And these are actually really great questions. We are not all going to encounter, hopefully, a situation like this where we have mass flooding or something of that nature. When those type of situations happen, typically FEMA and DMORT teams, which are disaster management teams, are dispersed to those areas. They're sent out, just like the National Guard would be sent out. And they're sent out to deal with the contaminants and to deal with bodies and to deal with the deceased that are there. And so they are the ones who would actually, if a body is found that has been submerged from a cemetery, they will identify through forensic dentists or anthropologist or whatever other means they have, DNA or whatnot, they will identify to then rebury at the time that it can be done the deceased. So those things will happen, during the course of this. I'm hoping to get some more DMORT interviews and things to share with you, because that disaster response, when people are actually in there handling and caring for the deceased and for the uprooted bodies essentially, is so fascinating to me. And I think it's such an epic thing to do and to care for those bodies, especially that you can re-find them a home and identify them, and then also the newly deceased, identify them and get them into their kind of forever resting place. So for this question, I wanted to get some, professional above me answers for you, because I could Google the crap out of anything and talk to you about it, but I like to have information myself or get the professional answer for you. So for this, I went to some DMORT members and looked for some FEMA and OSHA information. And so I had a gentleman named Jim who was awesome, and he did some of this legwork for me, and he's part of a DMORT team and has done a lot of disaster response. And so he looked into OSHA and FEMA and rapid water rescue teams, who are those teams that are trained to, as you see in a lot of those news stories, they traverse through the rushing water to go get somebody when they're stuck out in the middle, on top of the car or in a tree or whatever. So he got this response, which I'm going to be reading to you. Regarding human remains and or caskets found floating in floodwaters. Prelude. When the body of water is not flood related, then intervention is helpful. But be careful. Even in a common body of water with obvious currents, an object the size of a human remains will multiply the pressure of the current against a potential rescuer. So they're saying that even if it's not like rapid water flood things, that water is going to be trickier to pull a body out of because of the way that it affects the current. So if your safety is in jeopardy, do not put yourself in harm's way to go rescue a body or a casket or something. You know, notify someone that, hey, you saw Great Aunt Marge floating down a river, but you could not safely, you know, grab her and bring her into where you were. They can then go look for her and can go find her. A floating casket could be pushed or pulled against a rescuer by thousands of pounds, like trying to stop a car from rolling down an incline. And being pinned against a stationary object by a floating casket would be like having a rolling car pin you against a tree. So a casket could definitely kill you in a water movement type situation if you get between the casket and another object. The flood scenario, standing flood water with little or no current might also be entered using common sense and reasonable care. But rising standing water could come in contact with electricity or toxic chemicals and will nearly always offer slippery footing. So again, there's often dangers that you're maybe not aware of right in the initial moment that you see somebody. And keep in mind that that person is dead. They can't die more than they're already dead. So if you don't get to them, they will be recovered at some point, hopefully. But it's not always worth your life to get to them. Moving floodwater is extremely dangerous. In addition to the current knocking down a potential rescuer, the current might carry obvious objects like cars and trees and houses with it. Less obvious objects, though, could be under the water and moving. Hazardous and toxic chemicals and animals such as livestock or snakes. So, big dead cow under the water moving past is going to knock you down. Hypothermia is always a risk. The depth of floodwaters can change unexpectedly, either by suddenly rising or washing away ground under your feet, even paved surfaces. Trained rescuers always wear a helmet and a personal flotation device, and they work in teams with spotters both up and downstream and prioritize their own safety first, then the safety of their team and the victim last. Kind of like when you're on the plane and the oxygen masks drop out, you have to make sure you're safe before you can help somebody else, because you're no good to anybody and you become a secondary victim if you're putting yourself in harm's way by trying to help the person first. Don't risk your life. Don't expect rescuers to risk their lives to rescue you. Perhaps your greatest help will be to document a floating remains or casket with photography. Pictures are even better when supported with notes about time and place and direction of movement. We funeral service professionals have the greatest level of respect for human remains and have a strong urge to protect them. We are not first responders who are trained and equipped in rapid water rescue, and we are not armed forces engaged in battle and risking our lives to leave no one behind. So yes, respond every time that you see a human remains or a casket in a situation that seems abandoned or otherwise unsupervised. Use all of your training, experience, and common sense. Get help, and if you choose to enter the water, remember some of the warnings above. In most jurisdictions, a found human remains, even in a casket, would be referred to the local medical examiner or coroner, whether you capture the remains or let them go downstream to another destination. So I think these are great words of advice, great pieces of information to follow if you are in those situations and you are concerned because you see somebody or a casket or, you know, there's something that you want to go to help the situation, but you don't know whether you should. And I think especially, I remember a friend who had gone, I think it was Hurricane Katrina, and did some rescue, and he actually had to be, airlifted out because he was walking through some floodwater, and that water is so contaminated with debris that he cut his leg and it got so infected so quickly, they had to get him out of there because his life was then in jeopardy. And it was something you couldn't even see under the water, but that water is full of so many contaminants because the sewer and all the chemicals that are washed into it. So a body with really old formaldehyde is not as big a concern in this situation as everything else that is into that water at that time. So hope this answered your question, Steve. I think it was a really great question and a good little training for somebody that might be in this type of situation. So keep questions coming. I love these ones that we can focus a whole video on a question that teaches, you know, somebody something. I love it. So thanks for joining me, guys, and I will see you on the next video. Bye.